because then there was a new call coming in. Now I figured it out. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm kind of a Skype novice.
That's okay. That's all right.
Well, you got
We'll
to
be
start
gentle.
somewhere. Okay.
So yes, greetings.
But it worked. We did it. We have,
Only
crossed
took
the
22 minutes.
yeah. Well, we crossed that first hurdle. So I already started to stream. Sorry. So
You started to scream.
the stream, yes. Ice cream. Anyway, the stream has started. So yeah, we can start whenever you are ready.
Well, I was ready 22 minutes ago. Now 23 minutes ago. So I already started. So
Okay.
You're actually mid rant already. We just didn't know.
Yes, actually. Well, I suppose I can moderate most of the part.
Sure, and just to let you guys know, I'm also recording this, and this is going to be this is also going to be an episode of the Fedora Chronicles radio show, Electric Speakeasy edition. So, are you guys drinking yet? Are you guys having anything to drink?
I am actually. I have some Tanqueray Rangpur gin with some Thomas Henry tonic water. So. Yeah.
I'm drinking coffee.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm sure that they once in a while they served coffee at a speakeasy. So
well, yeah, with whiskey in it, right?
Oh yeah. So anyway, also here in the background, you guys may hear my son's birds. We're in the middle of a horrible cold snap. And this is the warmest room of the house, so this is where the birds are going to be for a little while. So I apologize if the sounds of the birds they're fighting, or they're doing something else. And I'm don't ask, don't tell.
Right.
It adds a touch to the tropics to the whole thing. So.
It does. So let's begin at the beginning, Bozart. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so this apparently is the Anachronistic Society Speakeasy edition. It's also my kind of anniversary discussion.
You're still celebrating your anniversary.
Yeah, I haven't really done it, so now I'm compensating the entire month. Yes. So yeah, basically this entire conversation started with an article Eric, wrote. Yeah, just tell us about it and how the response of it was. What was it about, first of all, for all the people that are listening?
First and foremost, it really sort of started it with an idea on the Diesel Powered podcast with John Pica, and I think that Boss Man Larry was there, and we were just talking about 10 years of diesel punk. And what's been going on in the past 10 years. And one of the things that I had said is that diesel punk and steampunk and a lot of the other sort of punk movements, as it were, the slash punk movements or the retro punk movements, as I like to call it, is that they've sort of like lost their mission goals. We have all sort of lost our, I guess I don't want to say mojo, but the thing is that it's like I think that we've sort of lost some of the anti-establishment, anti-authority angst that I believe, and if I'm wrong, I'm sure somebody will tell me that steampunk and diesel punk and all these other punks, but most especially steampunk. And so I took my ideas from this podcast and I said, listen, I don't know if we can really call. I'm just going to say steampunk. I don't know if we can call steampunk anymore. Because, like I had said, it's lost something, and to make matters even worse, is that steampunk is sort of like not everybody in steampunk, but it seems to me the vast majority of the people are looking at a few so-called experts out there who have been in steampunk forever since the very beginning, and these people are trying to pass themselves off as the arbiters of what is and what isn't steampunk. And the rules of steampunk are sort of purposely left vague, so the Pope or the Pope-ette of steampunk is able to decry from her throne what is or what isn't, or his throne what is or isn't steampunk. And there's sort of there's a cruel element to it. that I think. And when I watched the series Steampunked, and I watched it again, it took me an entire Sunday afternoon to watch this from beginning to end. I think that this is when steampunk really sort of, I don't want to say jumped the shark or nuked the fridge or whatever, but I really sort of think that you're looking at three people who are trying to say that isn't steampunk. And the thing is that what makes steampunk is doing your Victorian science fiction, fantasy style wares, whether it's costume or interior or whatever, and you're doing it, and because you're doing it, it's steampunk, I guess. But it's like if it's not going to have that sort of like, fighting the establishment, anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian, and we're appointing people of authority. It's sort of morphing away from steampunk into, I think, what John Pica coined the phrase, or somebody else coined the phrase, cogs play. And
Right,
and a lot of people who they read the title, Requiem of Steampunk, and automatically they're saying that people aren't doing steampunk anymore, or steampunks. I didn't say anything of the sort in my article. I'm sorry, and maybe I picked a sensational headline to grab people's attention, but it grabbed their attention in such a way they didn't even read the article. I'm not saying that this genre is dead. I'm saying this aspect, the punk aspect of it, has been lost, and I don't expect people to change because of me or because of one article. I even said this in the article. I don't expect everybody to change for me, but I do think that we should get back into the entire retro punk movement. Should get back into it, because one of the things that somebody had told me is that on Casual Friday, he can't wear his Edwardian clothes. We're not talking about the steampunk version of the Ghostbusters Power Pack or whatever. Just talking Victorian style clothes. He can't even wear that while everybody else is able to show up to work in their favorite team's jersey and sweatpants and cross trainer sneakers, everything that has the New England Patriots logo on it. I'm just using the New England Patriots because that's where I am. I'm in New England. And it was just like there, and I also sense that there's a sense of prejudice against people who are into the retro punk movement, and that Johnny over there can show up, and he can show up in a kilt, or he can show up in his favorite sports wear, his sports jersey, but we can't show up dressed up the way that make us feel comfortable on Casual Fridays. Mm-hmm. So that was the genesis of the article.
Phoebe, I'll just let you respond.
Well, first off, that Casual Friday thing, that's ridiculous. I don't know what's up with that office, that they won't let someone wear the Victorian clothes. That's just weird. I've never heard of that before. So that's really interesting. I also have an article that went up this week, if anyone wants to read it. It is not a direct response to Eric's article, but it is something that sort of goes hand in hand, because he was talking about how people make steampunk their own, and we need to allow people to do that. So that's what my article is about. But it's funny, this aspect of punk. So I am 32, so I did not live through punk as a thing. I was, a child. So maybe I don't have as strong of a visceral feeling about what punk has to mean for it to be okay to apply this to steampunk. Personally, my understanding of the punk movement is that it came from feelings. It came from frustration, and people picked up instruments and started expressing themselves through music as a way to channel frustration, and not because they were trained at it, because they felt a need to express themselves. And so for me, that's where the punk of steampunk has always come from, is this idea of participation and participating on your own terms. And I see plenty of that going on. So I guess I do take issue with this idea that steampunk can't be punk. But it might be because punk has evolved. And maybe that's really the conversation, is how has punk changed versus should steampunk aspire to be more punk in some way?
Oh yeah, I'll just add to that. Yeah, for me, I guess I was also a bit confused on what you were talking about with the whole punk aspect because yeah, there certainly is or has been a movement that focused very much on the recycling aspect of it. Yeah, and the value of that within steampunk is a bit of a debate. Like you say, Josh Kingsley, who really doesn't like the recycled aspect of steampunk, that he, well, paraphrasing, finds it a bit amateurish. And I know there are more people like that who, for that reason, don't want to be labeled as steampunk. One of the best examples I know of is Le Machines in France. Um, People probably know the picture of the clockwork elephant, which people can ride through the park. That's from that. They don't want to be called steampunk, or so I've heard from various French steampunks. And I assume it's that for that reason. Um, so yeah, in my response, I focused a lot on what does it mean to be punk. I think that's a bit of a problem that people don't know what steampunk means, so they want to change it into new steampunk or something, or and redefine that as it were. Or they just want to have Victorians now and then. You're gonna have to start a conversation. What is Victorian to begin with? So yeah, that's also the reason I don't like the label steampunk for myself. I don't identify with that label because, well, I don't know what it is, so to speak, like most people. So yeah, that's kind of
So,
my input at the
so
point.
wait, so Bonzo, you have a radio show that's devoted to steampunk,
Hmm.
but you are unwilling to take on that label for yourself?
Not entirely unwinning. I just I don't know. It's something I'm just not comfortable with, especially because, well, there are people that have bad things saying, yeah, but what you do isn't steampunk. So,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
yeah, so that's one issue. Also, yeah, it's too. Um, I chose the name Radio Retro Future for a reason. That's what I
Hmm.
consider myself more. I am not particularly specific in what my characters are when it comes to either are they dieselpunk or are they steampunk, because my problem with dieselpunk and steampunk and all those other punks, for one, is that they're all so similar, but they also want to be unique. So they think by, oh, I'm just gonna call it different what I do. That way, I
Hmm.
can escape the burden of not being found original or something. I'm not sure what the mentality here, and also sure it's just clickbait, but it's another discussion. Um, so yeah, I'm not comfortable with the label. It's not. I use the term for myself in conversation because it's easy. Steampunk is most of all a magic word. When you say you're steampunk, people immediately understand in in general sense what you're talking about. That's why I say steampunk is like porn. You know it when you see it. Um, I think that's for a lot of people the case. And how do you know it's steampunk? Well, just because. Um, yeah, and yeah, that's. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think that one of the things that I tend to agree with you on all those points is because the thing is like we use the labels because it's just it's easier. It's verbal shorthand, as it were. And you get to say, okay, I'm a diesel punk or I'm a steampunk because the thing is that there is that immediate um, identification. There's that immediate recognition, and and I like to dabble in both steampunk and diesel punk, and recently I've really got into atom punk and whatever. And there's one thing that is like I read here, and Phoebe actually wrote. Oh, I'm sorry. Phoebe actually wrote this, and Phoebe, do you mind if I quote you for us in
No,
your
go ahead.
article?
Go
It
for it.
says, okay. But when you post your version of a clockwork cactus, you are met with a tide of criticism telling you that you failed to create something steampunk, and people are not interested in your contribution. They are effectively telling the creator to shut up and sit down. That's the thing that really, really irks me, is that somebody actually thinks that they have the power to tell somebody we don't want your contribution. Who appointed this person as the authority to say to that person who created the steampunk cactus, as it were? And I'm not sure if the steampunk cactus is something real, if it's actually that something happened, or if it's just that's just an example that you created. As the thing is, who appointed these people to be the guardians of what is or what isn't steampunk? If somebody were to ask me to determine whether or not something is diesel punk, I could say, look, this is my opinion, and I think that you could have done this or that a little more, or your thing is more atom punk, or your thing is more steampunk. But the thing is that it's like, if I start going about and I start, if I'm carried through conventions on a throne, and I get to determine what is or what isn't diesel punk, and I give people the thumbs up. You guys have the permission to punch me in the face if I become that kind of an a-hole. And there's a couple people, and there's one of the people who was on this. It's not a game show. It's a parody. It's a steampunk parody of what's the one with Heidi Klum? Project
Runway.
Okay, so Project Steampunk had a couple of people, and there was a judge, and this judge has a reputation of being very litigious, and has a reputation of, if this person sees something that she thinks that somebody, quote, stole from her. It's Cato. I'm just going to come out and say it. Allegedly, Cato has sent cease and desist orders from people. And it's like, I'd like to get confirmation of that first and foremost. But if it's true, who put her in charge of steampunk? Who did that? Did she do it? Is she self-appointed? If she's the self-appointed authority in what's steampunk, then it's not steampunk anymore. It's steam dystopia.
Well, on the one hand, I can see being an artist who wants to protect something that she views. I mean, this is the first I've heard of this, but on the one hand, I can sympathize as someone who obviously was a forerunner in a lot of the fashion stuff, that she might feel protective. But that doesn't change that. If there's a person making something for themselves, that's very different than, and they take inspiration from her designs, that's very different from turning around and trying to do something commercial with it. So, yeah, without knowing the full story, I do sympathize a little bit with that, with her position as a creator, trying to protect herself. But it'd be a real shame if it's true that it's just like to individuals, if that's how she's acting. I don't know.
Yeah, let's not speculate too much on
that. But I will interject here and say that is one example of what I have seen. I have seen people who are self-appointed authority figures discourage people for not being steampunk enough, and you've seen it. I mean, am I wrong?
Who are you asking right now?
Both of you. Am I wrong?
Well, yeah,
has that not happened?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly happens. I mean, that was why the article that you were quoting from originally ran in 2014, when I was really new in steampunk, and so I was spending a lot of time on Facebook groups and things like that, and I definitely saw it there. And my response has been, I don't interact with those kinds of places anymore, because I just got sort of sick of it. And I decided to focus more on researching and figuring out my own ideas. Because I did. I got so sick of people trying to police it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much it is still happening. That's the only thing I feel weak on being able to say how prevalent it currently is, because I go out of my way to avoid those conversations
Hmm.
because they're frustrating.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But
The whole.
but oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah, the
Bonzar.
whole thing is indeed like it's all so subjective. That's the biggest issue I have right now, and the whole and where it becomes problematic is that no one is really talking about. Gee, where should we? What can we do with steampunk? Oh well, is this steampunk? Is that steampunk? And I rather hear, these are the possibilities we can do with steampunk. I see very little people talking about it. Um, and also this attachment to that label. Like I got this question today on YouTube. Like, is the Golden Compass or League of Extraordinary Gentlemen steampunk? Well, I responded to that in my next video. But in the end, what does it matter? Like, is this gonna change the enjoyment of this movie? Is it gonna change its message? So it's really a topic that, yeah, there's nothing at stake if something is or is not steampunk. That's basically.
Well,
Go ahead.
as an organizing principle, though, as a thing to be able to say, people who like steampunk in general will like this thing
Mm-hmm.
because it contains aspects of steampunk that they will enjoy. So in that way, I feel like steampunk is an important organizing principle, because time and time again, and I'm reading Steampunk Bible again right now,
Mm-hmm.
but this has happened in my own life too. Most of the time, when I talk to people about their relationship with steampunk, they will say, I liked all of these things before I ever knew the word, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
so glad that I have a word for it now.
Right.
And I think as an organizing principle, as an umbrella, it is still valuable as a word, even if there are lots of things that fit under that umbrella. As an umbrella term for people to be able to identify, oh, someone is saying this is steampunk, I bet I will enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the word is still very important,
No,
and it conveys meaning.
no, I totally agree with you. As a matter of fact, I'm saying this very much in my video that I'll post tomorrow. I say exactly the same thing. So yeah, it is a
Well, but
magic
you said,
word.
what's the point? You said, what's the point of
Uh,
applying the label? And I'm saying, this is the point of applying the label.
well, I'm not sure that's what I said. I say it's very subjective. But yeah, the organizing principle is undeniable. Absolutely.
Well, I think that another aspect of all of this is that arguing about what is and isn't steampunk is actually a part of steampunk. It is a very much a very large part of a steampunk group activity is debating about what is or what is not steampunk.
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing is that, and here's something else, is that when I wrote this and when I published this, I knew that there was going to be backlash, and I hoped that there would be. I hoped that I would be. This is my way of probably opening up the discussion
Mm-hmm.
in a direction that I don't think that I had seen before. But the thing is that the thing that really sort of surprised me in a lot of the things that people had said to me is, well, how dare you say that steampunk is dead? And people got adamant about it. And for me, that was like, yes, that is a steampunk right there. Somebody who is willing to mix it up with somebody and stand up for what it is that they believe is steampunk or isn't steampunk, or if steampunk is alive or dead. I'm glad that I got that reaction out of that person who took me to task. And I have no problem saying I hope I'm wrong. I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that this turns into some kind of a discussion about should we. And you said this, Bonzart, that we should be talking about what do we want to do with steampunk. You have I don't want to call them costumes. You have your clothes, you have your outfits, and you have your steampunk wardrobe. You have your steampunk vehicles and in the rooms in your house that's steampunk. Well, okay, what are you doing about it? Hollywood, wake up. There are talented people out there who are writers and costume clothes designers and set designers and prop makers. Put these people to work. You're missing out. If you're from Hollywood and you're listening to this, you're missing out. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No, absolutely, you're not wrong. Yeah, Hollywood, listen up. There have been a couple random attempts and stuff. It's funny. I see these big video projects, these bigger budget projects, sort of like hullabaloo, just disappeared. That was going to, yeah, that it just disappeared.
The World of Steam is going to have a restart.
Okay.
They are going to cooperate with Jim Henderson Studios. So, yeah, hope to hear more about that pretty soon. I like that first episode. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Well, Archangel, those guys are still working on getting their series on Steam. Has anyone ever heard anything, and then we'll stop this side road, of what Steven Spielberg was working on? What was it called again? Lunar?
I don't know. I haven't heard of it.
Okay. No, I haven't heard of it for a long time either. So, yeah, maybe I should check that out again.
So, I wanted to address this question of what to do with it, what to do with steampunk. Mm-hmm. Because I come at it very much from the writer's side of things. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like there is so much power in words. And so a lot of the good that I feel like I see steampunk doing is in the literature. Mm-hmm. Because that's where a lot of the punk is happening, is it's taking the verb, I should say, punking it as in more like the Ashton Kutcher kind of punk, the way the verb has come to mean play a joke on. And so I feel like in literature, there's a lot to offer in terms of role models and facing the status quo that's told through the Industrial Revolution, but we're seeing a parallel. I mean, our addiction to and the way that technology is changing us and interacting with us. I feel like that's a big, important thing that's happening through all of these punks. Any of them has to do with how technology has affected us. And so I see a lot happening in books, especially because they are expanding to include more cultures that aren't just America and the UK during this time period, that they are problematizing the history in a really interesting way that is a form of activism. So I'd say from the literature side, I mean, yeah, there is having something pretty in your house to look at is one thing, but it is such a big monster, right? Steampunk is so multifaceted.
I think that getting back to points that we have made earlier, I think that we do need some activism. I think that there are a lot of us who are just anachronistic. We just don't belong in this place and time. I feel like there are aspects of my life that I would like to be able to go back. I mean, just the style and the aesthetics and a work ethic, and the idea that it was just like, put some music on, put on the kettle, sit down and just talk to somebody. And well, we're doing a digital version of that right now with this podcast. But there's a notion that we are on the metaphysical connection. Walt and I talked about this in the episode that we published yesterday, is that there's this thing called hyperconnectivity, where people cannot help themselves but constantly be attached to media, constantly. Mm-hmm. You constantly have to have the TV on. You constantly have to check Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and see what's going on. And the thing is that it's losing its... It's being diluted by the simple fact that it's always there. It's becoming ubiquitous, and that's all. But that's okay. That's socially acceptable. But it's not socially. Excuse me. It's not socially acceptable for somebody to wear their Edwardian clothes to the prom. Whereas, but I mean, and I'm not saying that this is. I'm not saying that this what I'm about to say is wrong. It's like, but it's okay for somebody to be transgender, or it's okay for somebody to be a transvestite or whatever, but you cannot be transtemporal. You cannot dress like from a different period.
I love that term.
Yeah,
I wonder.
temporal. I'm gonna keep
I wonder
that
if this is a regional difference. Because I've been mostly active in the Midwestern steampunk scene,
Yeah.
and there a lot of people out here form airships. So they
Yeah.
are clubs, and a lot of those clubs are doing like there's one in Ann Arbor, or maybe not Ann Arbor, but in Michigan here near me, this week that's collecting food for a food drive and things like that. And but I wouldn't. I mean, I think steampunks are people who dress anachronistically are going to get the hairy eyeball, but
Yeah, we do. We do.
but yeah, but I don't think. I don't know. I mean, you have your example of the guy who's not allowed to wear his Edwardian stuff to work, which is insane. Um, and I haven't run into examples like this at all. I tend to wear more. My steampunk stuff is more subtle anyway. I like jewelry a lot, so I wear that stuff out all the time. I mean, I made a point of buying stuff that would be easy to wear all the time, so then I can talk to people about steampunk whenever they ask me about it. So yeah, I don't know. I wonder how much of this is regional, or maybe I'm just not putting myself out there enough to have gotten the same kind of antagonistic reactions that you are describing.
I think it would be an interesting social experiment for all of us, not just the three of us here, but everybody listening to the podcast. Go out in your anachronistic clothes and see how people react. And I mean, I get the hairy eyeball that I get the most are the conformists. The people who belong to the quote silent majority, the people who they are so straight and narrow, and they have such a narrow definition of what it is to be quote a man. Whereas it's like everybody has to wear what John Pica calls the great American uniform, where it's from the bottom up, sneakers, shorts or sweats, a t-shirt, and a ball cap. And the thing is that pretty much the whole thing is like it's almost like it's like your citizen uniform. It's like there's something sort of, I don't want to say socialist or communist about it, but it does seem to have a little bit of the purge that happened in China, whereas they expelled all Western influences in clothes and media. They had the great cultural purge. And there are people who are living a great culture purge, at least here in the East Coast or in the Northeast. Because you have to fit this cookie cutter, and if you don't fit in the cookie cutter, there's no place for you except for other people who don't. And I'm fine with that. I'm not a cookie cutter guy, I'm not even a cookie cutter diesel punk, as it were. But people are so hammered into being stereotypes that if you don't adhere to the socially acceptable stereotype, you're shunned in some areas.
Yeah, well, I get a lot of people ask me what I'm wearing, like my colleagues on works and places like that. Some people might even recognize it as steampunk, which I think is quite funny because steampunk, well, a lot of people in the Netherlands still don't know what it is. So I often have to explain that. But I never really had any real problems with it. No. But so yeah, I think it really depends on the time and place. I know of a girl I know that lives in a more religious community, so to speak, and yeah, she hides that she's a steampunk.
So it is. So it's true. I mean, you do see people who have to. And maybe this is not a proper word to use it because it has a different connotation, but people hide their retroism in the closet, as it were. They're closeted transtemporalists. And I think and the thing is, if that's the case, if you have to hide who you are because you're afraid of how other people are going to react and reject you, this is not a free society then. If we're gonna reject people, or if we're gonna have prejudice of people because they dress differently, this is not a free society. This is a free society for a select few who conform. And I know that that's always been a problem here in the United States, and it's been a lot worse too. And I'm not.
I was just going to say, this isn't a new problem
Oh,
that you're describing.
But I do think that it was just like there's a prejudice against nerds. So there's no other way to say it. Geeks and nerds have always been.
But this is the best time to be a geek, Eric.
Oh, it is.
This is by far the best time to be a geek.
I totally agree, but I think that we could slope even further, though.
Oh, sure. But I mean, it's going to take time. It's the same way that, they predict that the prejudice against same-sex marriage, it's just going to age out. It's just the people who are being born don't have those ideas. So as the people who are old die off, we're not going to have to worry about it. And so it's just a matter of it's time for some of this stuff. So I feel like we're doing really well as geeks. And the internet makes it so you can find your tribe. That's one thing that I really, I love that about being a fan now, is that we can do things like this. Or when I was living abroad, I didn't have to lose my audience. When I was living in Bulgaria, I could still write and connect with the people, back home.
Do either of you remember the life and time before the internet? How far back do you go?
I kind of remember it. I remember getting my first 65K modem. Oh my god.
Yeah, I remember being. I had to be about 11 or 12 based on where we were living at the time. And we had just moved away from the major city to a small town. And we had to dial long distance to get to one of AOL's 3 phone numbers. And so I was limited to only 15 minutes of internet a day because it was a long distance call.
Yeah.
So I do remember that.
Because the thing is that because I was in my, I believe I was, let me think, 34. No, I'm not that old. I think I was in my early 20s when the internet became something. Like when I was 22 in college, there was this thing called the internet. You can go to the computer lab and you can get on BB boards, bulletin boards, and whatever. And the thing, but before that, and that's the best way to find your tribe or stay in touch with your tribe. But it's like if you were a part of a nerd tribe, you had to wait for a convention to find your people. And sometimes, listen, conventions are not going to. I don't think that there's really ever going to be like a Star Trek convention here in the middle of New Hampshire where I live. I don't think it's ever going to happen. You have to go and travel and meet your tribe, and if you were fortunate, you would find other groups to participate with. But I mean, if you were a nerd living out in the country, that was painful, and it was like that was a fate worse than death if you had to leave and you were moved to somewhere where it was just like it's like 3 or 4 hours or 6 hours to get to like a major population center where your tribe met. This is really. I think another thing we're talking about here is that we're still dealing with the issue of. Not tribal warfare with spears and arrows, but I think we are still dealing with some tribal issues because I consider you guys part of my tribe. I consider you my people, as it were, because we are retrocentrics, as it were. And the thing is, there's like, if I hurt your feelings with my article, if I made you feel bad with my article, I feel horrible. I'm sorry and I'm embarrassed if I came off the wrong way.
No.
And I mean, and I did move a couple of sentences around in my article after I published it initially, to put my point ahead of the curve, as it were, on the top of the page, saying, "Look, this is what I really mean." And I think as punks, I think that we have to, because we've been in it long enough, and I think that we're strong enough. I think we need to put ourselves out there and stand up for the little guy. Stand up for the kid who is being bullied by the other punks, the bullies in our community, who are declaring themselves authority figures and saying, that's not punk, that's not steampunk. we need to do a better job silencing those people who are ruining it for the rest of us. And maybe that's not
Here, here.
silence, but we should criticize them more, perhaps. But yeah, I stay away from that corner. I stay away from the Falksons and stuff like that. So I don't often see their messages, which I don't think would enrich my life as if the stories are to be believed. But to talk about what I find so special, and I call it in my next video, I call it a magic word, the word steampunk, and that somehow this word that nobody really knows what it means yet, for some reason, it seems to hold a community together. It's really funny how language can work. We say it this way. But my question is, what can we do? And what can we do to keep steampunk fluent, so that it doesn't become like the Latin language, dead, but yet keep that same spirit alive? And I think, that's what I'm missing. That vision, that's something that people strive for.
Well, I feel like, you're asking for sort of action, right? Action that can be taken, and declaring that you don't care if someone says your thing isn't steampunk if you believe it is, right? Like
Basically,
encouraging other people encouraging these little guys that you're talking about, acting as mentors almost, because, right, we can't, the genre, the aesthetic, the whatever, the community is not going to continue if more people can't come in. And so recruiting almost, but doing it in a really constructive way. I also wanted to mention, Bonsard, I don't know if you're familiar about this. There is I believe it's called Steamworks is the name of the lab, and they actually use STEAM technology for education.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and it's super cool. There's more than one place that does this, but yeah, where it's specifically using industrial techniques and things to teach people about the history of technology, which I think would be a really cool thing, for sure, that steampunk can do. And it, there can be some whimsy that brings people in, but they leave learning history.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so punking history and presenting alternative versions of history, I think, is a really cool dialogue, a cool way that people could interact and learn from history, but they don't know how. It's not something that we're asked to do, right? We memorize facts and we spit them back out, but like interacting with history, I feel like is something really cool that steampunk offers.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I'd love to see, people using that more actively. But yeah, that takes a lot of effort, and nobody has really taken up that mantle, so to speak. So I hope to see that aspect become more prolific. Just what you said, like in science and physics education, stuff like that. Because steampunk is ideal for that. People are often talking about how do you say, education is becoming very bland. The education system certainly wasn't for me in that respect. So yeah, I'd be really interested if somebody really would take on that mantle and promote it in a wider context, so to speak. Use steampunk as that inspiration to do so.
Here, a question that I keep coming back to, and I think that do we want to keep steampunk and all the other retro punk aspects? Do we want to keep it an underground movement, or do we want it to go mainstream? Do we want to see? And if it does go mainstream, will it lose something? Will it be diluted? Do we really want somebody like some designer like Calvin Klein, for example? Do we really want somebody like Calvin Klein to determine what is or what isn't steampunk on Madison Avenue through whatever steampunk line he might come up with, or is that something that we actually want to embrace?
So you're saying, should we silence Calvin Klein and not allow him to participate in steampunk just because he's mainstream? Because that would be the flip side of that question, right? I mean, that's the reasoning.
And that would be an unintended consequence, I guess, to what I just said. But the thing is that do we want steampunk to go mainstream?
It's something that I think will just happen. And a matter of fact, I believe that steampunk has always been part of the mainstream. I mean, it's steampunk that basically took a mainstream idea, the kinds of things that Disney did in Wild Wild West. So steampunk just made it its own, so to speak, something that was mainstream and popularized it to an unforeseen heights, I think.
Well, in Glee, there was a character on Glee. The first time he appeared, he was all decked out in steampunk, and it was all about, is he allowed to wear this outfit and stuff like that. That was in a couple years ago. I would say steampunk is mainstream, honestly.
Okay.
I feel like it's obviously it's not as big of a fandom as, say, Star Trek or something, but I would say it's pretty safe to say that it has it's or maybe it's a little a little brother of mainstream, but it is some version of mainstream, I'd say, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Bob Dylan had an exhibit that, it was mostly steel, but a lot of people were pointing at that as steampunk, and everyone knows who Bob Dylan is. So, well, and I have reviewed something like 25 different films, and these are major Hollywood films, a lot of them, through the lens of steampunk. And so there are aspects. They might be philosophical only. They might not be aesthetic. They might just be philosophical that go hand in hand with it. But I have found quite a lot that resonates with me as a steampunk fan in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, is there a cutoff date for steampunk, for example? Like, we have Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, although as early, what's that, the 20s or the 30s? It's one of the reasons why I said this in several videos of mine. Like, I consider steampunk as something that really thrives on geek culture and pop culture in general. I mean, if something is popular in pop culture, you bet there's going to be a steampunk version of it or something that's really inspired by it. I stand by that. So the question is more like, where do you draw the line between steampunk and mainstream? Because it's a very fluid one.
I think I'm too close to the problem to tell you, because the thing is that I keep trying very, very hard to keep things as retro as possible. And I try to include, and I'm using and abusing modern technology to keep the retro vibe alive, as it were. And for me, when I go to an antique store to look for something to put in the house, I favor that more than going over to Target or wherever. But it's like, I think that there has to be some sort of a Victorian or Edwardian vibe to it. But here's the thing: it's like, by asking me that question, is that you are putting me in a position of authority that I don't want. I don't want to be the one who says what's the cutoff. I think that it's like, but there are also some pillars that I think that steampunk should adhere to, so that it remains true to steampunk, or diesel punk for that matter. And I'm very conflicted about both of that.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm conflicted. I admit
it. Maybe better than thinking in terms of definitions, right, which are concrete, unchanging. Rather than definitions, maybe it's better to take a mindset of more like best practices, right?
That's better.
Like how well does whatever embrace the best practices of steampunk or of dieselpunk or whatever. Because it's all gray, right? I mean, the whole world's gray area. It actually isn't black and white. We like to pretend it is, but it's really all gray. And so, and especially, you know, we're living in this very postmodern, everything is determined by the individual sort of era right now as well. So, yeah, I think maybe best practices, or like, how does this align with my idea of steampunk? Rather than is or is not.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you want to have some sort of manual, best practices would be the best approach, because no one is ever going to agree on what steampunk is and when something is steampunk. So.
But I think we can agree that best practices wise, like based not just on the era, but based on being a decent human being, like don't be a dick. That right? Like that should be a pillar. I think I feel confident in saying that I'm okay with saying don't be a dick. It should be a founding principle of steampunk.
But I find that highly sexist. Don't you? Don't you think?
Okay.
Please spare me.
Yeah. Of course, then the alternative would be douche, which would be sexist going the other direction.
It is, you know.
Don't be a meaty face. How about that?
Or as my kids used to say when they were much smaller, much smaller. You know, don't be a potty head.
Don't be a stick in the mud.
But anyway, Phoebe, right now, while we're doing this, I'm actually quoting you right now on Twitter.
Oh, great.
I'm making notes as well.
Because there is going to be a quiz later on, students. But I do think, I mean, what I would, and I was reminded of this today. Do you remember in Citizen Kane where Orson Welles as Charles Foster Kane is writing the Declaration of Principles? Like, I mean, I would really like to see something like a Vatican Convention for steampunk and dieselpunk to come together and say what are the best practices for all the retro punks. I think that would be interesting. But where would you have it? Would you want to have it in in London, or do you want to have it in the States somewhere? Where would we have it? But I think it would be interesting to have an actual convention where we actually discuss, like we would do like one day, have like a panel discussion on what are the best practices for retropunk, and then actually sit down and discuss. What do we want to do? What do we want to do with steampunk? It would be interesting. I'm not saying that everything would have to be carved in stone. I think it would just be interesting.
I agree. I think that would be fascinating. I think, though, probably the mechanism by which it could happen would be smaller scale discussions at something like the International Steampunk Symposium, for instance. Mm-hmm. If there was a session and there was a conversation and it was taped, and then the same kind of conversation happened more places, mm-hmm. right? And just to eliminate this need to travel, because as I describe myself regularly, I am aggressively broke.
I'm sorry.
I have some health problems, so I can't have a regular job. And so, I mean, this is why I've got this Kickstarter to try to get me to New Orleans right now, so I can report on this event that I have an opportunity to go to. But it's prohibitively expensive otherwise. And so I wonder, though, if we could try to coordinate something with events all over. And they wouldn't, and just whenever their event occurs. But even if it's like 10 questions, that the same 10 questions get asked at this same conversation all over the world, I think that would be fascinating, especially as an anthropologist. I would love to know how other people are defining it, depending on where they are.
And And also, we could host all of these videos on YouTube. But it's too bad we don't know somebody who's really good at putting stuff on YouTube. I guess. Oh,
Yeah, man.
well,
Yeah,
wait a minute.
I
So,
wonder who you're talking about. Yeah, but I want to suggest like we can start with just start the Anachronistic Society more often. Like we did last year, and start with that. And if that grows, we can take that to events more easily. Do it on events and tape it like that. But yeah, that takes. You need proper. Then yeah, then you get like that would take a lot of investment, especially in sound equipment and time and dedication. So I would take it on YouTube or other podcast venues. Start with that and
mhm.
promote that as much as possible. Get people listening to that and experiment with the format. Like how can you do that? But the one of the benefits online is that people can always put their questions right there in the chat, which can
Yeah,
be
that is nice.
a lot
Mhm.
less intrusive than having it live when you have to deal with a lot of technical stuff. And here on YouTube, it's just like, yeah, you know how to stream and you can organize your own little hangouts, and you can invite up to 8 people to that. And so, yeah, I would take it online to begin with. They can also
Yeah.
invite people from other countries easier that way.
Yeah, but it would be limited. You're saying 8 people, right, in the conversation. I'm talking about a room with 100 people in it,
Yeah, yeah,
and
but
and it'd be really hard to
yeah,
do that if you're not in
let
sharing the
me
physical
yeah
space.
let me add something to that. Like you can have 8 people chatting in conversation, but you can also have the text chat. So
No,
people
I
can.
understand.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the conversation would be very different.
Hmm.
I, I
No.
think that I think that there's something to be said about being face to face.
Yeah.
There is. Yeah. Of course
And
there is.
there are, like, I mean, here's a fine example. There is something to be said about people who, I mean, whether you guys like it or not, you guys are here sitting in this room with me, while at the same time I'm sitting in your rooms with you right now. We are actually in the same. We're occupying the same 3 spaces simultaneously. And the thing
Mhm.
is that we're coming up with ideas that would never have ever come up with if we were not having this conversation.
That's the whole point. That's why I have this channel to do that.
Yeah, I think that is really sort of super important, that we actually sit down with each other as a group and say what are our declaration of principles,
Yeah, has
and
there
what
ever been a manifesto? Has there ever been a steampunk manifesto?
Oh,
I feel like I've run across it before.
yeah.
I
I'm sure
bet.
there is, but
Of course, somebody has to search right now.
Of course I do. Of course I do. ProfessorCalamity.livejournal is apparently. Oh, and then there's also a steampunk manifesto
Yes.
website. So yeah,
Yeah.
so it does exist. Someone has done it.
So the thing is that I think that we should actually, or
Wow.
more to the point, I should go and read what these people have said about all of this. I also think that there's a movement afoot as far as uniting all the retro punks, whether it's the clock punk, the steampunk, the diesel punk, atom punk, Ray Punk, all these people. I think that there's something going on. There's something afoot to bring everybody together, because I do think that I think that we all belong to, like, not the retrocentric nation, as it were, and within that there are all these little tribes. And why are we fighting? Or are we fighting? Or are we just having heated up conversations? Because that's just a group activity, like I said at the beginning of
Right.
this show.
That's part of being steampunk. I just heard, but okay.
That is.
I would love to see all of the retro punks come together. I've done most of my writing and things and my research in steampunk, but I have a character who is absolutely diesel punk, timing wise. And so I will eventually be writing in diesel punk as well. And it's this same punk aspect of all of the retro punks that I like, not just the time period that they are punking, but this idea of alternate history and twisting around what really happened. And so I think I wouldn't be the only one. I think that there are probably other people that would, yeah, absolutely support this. And so if that's what you see happening, I think that's great. I think that's awesome.
I think it's phenomenal, and I think that we really also need to, and this is one of the hardest lessons I've ever had to learn in my life, and I keep relearning it. Speak less and listen more. You have one mouth, but you have two ears, two eyes. So you really should be talking only a quarter as much as you're watching and listening. And instead of jumping to the point you think somebody is making, or you're just listening to figure out how to respond next. Mm-hmm. Actually, what is this person really trying to say? Because the thing is that there might be some kind of a language barrier or some kind of reference barrier that we're missing here. And really sort of really listen to people, and really sort of when somebody gets into, I'm frustrated, I don't know what steampunk is. And instead of everybody jumping down this person and saying and barraging people with the Steampunk Bible and the Steampunk Manifesto and whatever it is that I write in the future, stop and think. Ask this person, okay, what do you already think it is? And that's
a great place to start. Yeah,
it really is. So,
yep.
So as my therapist loves to say, well, folks, we're almost out of time. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we talk about your prescriptions?
No, I think we made quite some progress. So, yeah.
Well, did we fully discuss though this question of punk though? Is steampunk punk, or did we? Do we feel like we've done that? Because that is really why we came together today.
I know, but...
No,
but it sounds like we all kind of agree, actually.
Yeah. Well, because the thing is that, like I said, this is our favorite group activity. Mm-hmm. Discussing what is steampunk and what is diesel punk and what is not diesel punk. I think that we've come to the agreement that's our favorite group activity, and I don't think that we are ever going to settle on a definition. No. And that when I wrote what I wrote when I wrote it, because that's what I felt like I needed to say at the time, and listening to other people, I mean, really reading what people have to say about this is really sort of an eye-opening thing for me. I'm glad I wrote it. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I said what I said when I said it. But if I had to write it over again, I would not have said the same. I don't think I would have worded it the same way. I know I wouldn't have.
Well, and that brings up a really interesting, because you were talking about having more eyes and ears than mouths, and which I agree with that up to a point. But at some point, someone needs to be saying something for other people to react to. Mm-hmm. I got in an argument with a roommate in college because we had different approaches to meeting new people. And she said that she would just be quiet and listen. And I said, well, but then that puts all of the burden on them. Mm-hmm. So I like to put things out there and see how they react. And then, right. But to her, that was such an affront that I would do that to people. And I'm like, but I'm helping them because I'm giving them something to react to. So I am trying more and more to put myself out there in order to have these conversations more. I mean, this is a good example. A year ago, I wouldn't have come on a show like this. But so I'm trying to sort of, to I don't know, be more of a catalyst. And I think that's important too, is to have people who are making statements, even if like you're saying, you feel like you wouldn't make the same statement even a week later or in the same way, but the value is in making it. And so, and going along with encouraging people to add to the conversation, to add to to what is steampunk. I think that's part of it as well.
And to structurize it. But shall we leave it at that for tonight?
All right.
Okay.
Absolutely. This has been the best. This is the best time I've had with you guys. This is I think this is the best podcast the three of us have ever done together.
Yeah. It's also the first podcast we did with the three of us. But,
But it was
whatever.
awesome. So let's just embrace that.
Yeah. So, if you want to do this again, just let me know. And for you
Of course.
listeners, and for you listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you have ideas of your own, please let us know in the comments. Even if you just want to have if you want to come on and have a discussion with us, just send one of us a message, and I'm sure something can be arranged. Phoebe, Eric, I hope to do this again sometime. Maybe we can start together on that best practices manual or manifesto, whatever you want to call it. And for you people back home, as always, make it your way. Good day.
And don't forget to keep your chin up and your fedora on.
You have anything to add to that, Phoebe?
Well, my new catchphrase has become, "You always have a choice, so choose to be splendid."
Perfect.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, guys. So I'm gonna help my wife with the laundry, and I will talk to you guys a little bit.
Okay. Good night.
All right. It was great meeting you, Eric.
Same here. Talk to you soon.
Yes.
All right. Bye.
Well,
Bye.
Bye.